enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that, and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states the United States. Astonishing numbers. And
Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Today, I've got news of another Sir Keir Starmer U-turn, and this time he's ditching one of his few big policies, a £28 billion U-turn. In fact, even Ed Miliband agrees the green thing is going down the toilet. And moving on, the government's planning a crackdown that means if pro-Palestinian protesters climb all over a war memorial again, they could be sent to jail. But do they have the guts to enforce these rules? There's also the latest on the manhunt for Abdul Ezedi as armed police raid 2 addresses in Newcastle, including a kebab shop he used to work at. And I'll ask the burning question of the day. Is the countryside racist? Yes, that's actually what one wildlife charity is claiming. Ridiculous. It's all coming up in your next hour. So welcome to the show. As usual, I'd love to hear from you all the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com. Penny Mordaunt has stepped out of line today, some might say. She's saying that Rishi has had time to reflect on what he said yesterday about Brianna Ghey, this trans row that's kicked off. But I'll be joined by a constitutional lawyer later on who says actually the person who needs to apologise is Sir Keir Starmer. Plus, what do you make about this nonsense of the countryside is racist? Who would have thought? Walls, fields, canals, all part of the empire. Anyway, that's all coming in your next hour. But before that, it's time for your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. The Prime Minister says it's sad and wrong to link a comment he made about transgender people in the Commons yesterday with murdered teenager Brianna Ghey. Rishi Sunak is facing calls to apologise for making what Brianna's father described as dehumanising remarks. It's understood the family has been invited to meet the Prime Minister as he told reporters today that he was making a very clear point.
Like everyone, I was completely shocked by Brianna's case. To have your child taken from you in such awful circumstances is almost impossible to come to terms with. To use that tragedy to detract from the very separate and clear point I was making about Keir Starmer's proven track record of multiple U-turns on major policies because he doesn't have a plan, I think is both sad and wrong, and it demonstrates the worst of politics.
Rishi Sunak speaking there. Now, armed police have searched 2 addresses in Newcastle in their hunt for chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. It's understood the warrants included his place of work, but no arrests were made. Ezedi is believed to be suffering from severe facial injuries, which could be life-threatening if left untreated. The last recorded sighting of him was near Vauxhall Bridge in London, just 11 p.m. last Wednesday. Anyone with information should contact police. Protesters who cover their faces to avoid arrest could face tough penalties under new laws unveiled today. Demonstrators would also be blocked from climbing war memorials or carrying flares, and citing the right to protest will no longer be an excuse for causing major disruption. It says the Home Office seeks to crack down on what it calls dangerous disorder. Critics say the new powers represent a threat to civil liberties. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told the Commons that radical behaviour will not be tolerated.
Now, the right to protest is fundamental to our democracy. But where we see people hurling racist abuse, desecrating national memorials of great significance to our country, or taking flares to marches in order to cause disruption and fear, the only reasonable response is outrage and disgust. Tolerating these actions would be radicalising in itself.
Now, Labour is to scale back its flagship Green Prosperity Plan in a major U-turn following months of uncertainty. It's understood Sir Keir Starmer will confirm the changes today, citing increased economic uncertainty since the policy was unveiled in 2021. Labour had planned to spend £28 billion every year on environmental projects. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said it was further evidence of the Labour leader's record of flip-flopping on major issues. Labour MP for Selly Oak, Steve McCabe, told GBNews that the Tories' economic mismanagement is to blame.
I think this is a reflection of the parlous state of our economy. I mean, you have to remember when these proposals were originally put forward, it was 2021. It was before Liz Truss had taken her wrecking ball to the British economy. And it was before the national debt had reached the unbelievable levels it's now at.
NatWest has appointed a former UBS executive to lead its high-net-worth bank, Coutts. Emma Crystal will take the top job, reporting directly to NatWest interim chief executive Paul Thwaite. It's understood she'll also join the board of Coutts. It comes more than 6 months after the resignation of Peter Flavell in the wake of Nigel Farage's debanking scandal. And snow is blanketing parts of the country today as a cold spell settles in. Dozens of schools are closed as forecasters warn that up to 25 centimetres of snow could fall in some areas. Amber warnings for snow are in place in parts of northern England and North Wales, with yellow warnings across the rest of the UK. The Met Office says the worst is expected later today, with snowy conditions moving further north tomorrow. And molten lava is once again bubbling into the sky in Iceland, the country's third volcano eruption in recent weeks. Bright orange lava can be seen spilling across roads near the popular Blue Lagoon thermal spa in the southwest of the country. Residents in the town of Grindavik had already been evacuated after an eruption in mid-January. Officials have been working to divert lava flows away from homes and key infrastructures since November, amid fears that further eruptions could destroy nearby towns. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Right, loads to get our teeth stuck into today. Let's get cracking, and we start with yet another U-turn from Sir Keir Starmer, and this time he's ditching a flagship policy. That's right, Labour will confirm today that it's abandoning its policy of spending a staggering £28 billion a year on environmental projects. Sir Keir is expected to say the pledge is being scaled back because of changes in the economic landscape since it was unveiled in 2021. Well, I'm joined now by our political correspondent, Olivia Lee, in the Westminster studio. Olivia, Sir Keir, now known as Mr. Flip-Flop, but this is the biggest U-turn even of his career.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's hard to overstate the importance of this. Keir Starmer's green economy, which was to be backed by £28 billion of investment every year, was the central point of his leadership of the opposition. And that is what the differentiation point was between Labour and the Conservatives. This was the flagship policy. It was announced in 2021 by Rachel Reeves, and it has been stuck to by Labour very, very closely until today. Last year, actually, Ed Miliband, who's the Shadow Environment Secretary, tweeted saying that some people in Labour wanted them to back down and not invest in the green economy, but, and this is a quote, "but Keir and I will never let that happen." Now, today, even Ed Miliband has rode in behind Keir Starmer. Yesterday, there was some speculation that Ed Miliband could actually end up resigning over this, but no, he is rowing in behind Keir Starmer. So why has Starmer changed his tune on this? Well, it seems as though the deadline for Labour's manifesto was today, the 8th of February, and basically the party is determined to look as though it is fiscally responsible. They think that the one area of attack where the Conservatives might do quite well is saying that Labour just doesn't have a good grasp on the economy. Keir Starmer is determined to show that his numbers add up. And over the last few years, he's made quite a lot of expensive pledges. So basically, getting rid of this £28 billion per year for the green economy, for the environment, and reallocating it to other causes will help balance the numbers when that manifesto is published.
OK, I mean, this is so bad, even Ed Miliband is dishing it. You've got to ask some questions. Is it because the biscuit tin is empty? Is it fiscal responsibility? Or is it simply because these policies are going down like a lead balloon with the electorate? Well, earlier on, Labour MP Steve McCabe spoke to GBNews earlier. He defended Sir Keir Starmer's decision.
And you have to remember, when these proposals were originally put forward, it was 2021. It was before Liz Truss had taken her wrecking ball to the British economy. And it was before the national debt had reached the unbelievable levels it's now at. Obviously, what we're not backing down on is the need to have the green transition as an essential part of restoring and rebuilding our economy. What we're saying is we can't give a commitment to that level of borrowing now because it seems unlikely it will be affordable. I mean, we're talking here about 28 billion. I don't know how easy it is for people to visualise that sort of figure. But it has to be set against a national debt that's now at 2.6 trillion.
So there we have it. Is it a case of there's no money to do this? They're blaming the Conservatives for leaving the economy in a poor state of living. It's a bit rich when you think what Liam Byrne left that note saying, sorry, there's no money left in 2010. Or is it actually an awakening that this project fantasy meeting project reality, when the electorate, for example, in Uxbridge got a chance to vote on ULEZ, they voted it down. So are the Labour Party waking up to the fact that this is unpopular, or do you think they're just kind of pretend not to do it now and then change their mind later?
Well, I think it's a mixture of the two reasons that you lay out there, Martin. I think partly Labour has realised that if it wants to do all of the many things that it's promised in terms of, levelling up the regions where Labour is very popular, if it wants to cut tax for private schools, remove the tax exemption for private schools, etc. It needs to have some more cash. And one way of doing that is to cut this incredibly expensive investment. And I think Labour has essentially woken up to the fact that if it doesn't cut this £28 billion a year promise, then it just won't be able to meet its other spending commitments. But that isn't the only reason. There is definitely an electoral awareness here. What happens, we've seen time and time again, is that when the public are polled on what they feel about certain green measures, they are very, very enthusiastic. The people care a lot about climate change in theory. In practice, when these policies actually hit their wallet, then they are far less popular. And as you mentioned there, in Uxbridge, there was a by-election and it basically became a referendum on ULEZ. And the Conservatives ended up shock winning because they were opposing ULEZ. Labour is very, very aware of this, and that will certainly have played into their thinking today.
All of this, Olivia, isn't it, about the concept versus the cost to the electorate, the cost of the voter. Plus, we've seen that the government has been unable to even sell its offshore wind licences. Companies aren't investing in this technology because the margins aren't there, the profit isn't there, unless it's subsidised. And we've also seen a big downturn in people wanting electric vehicles because of reliability. Is there a general awakening amongst the political class, finally living in hope, that they're realising people don't actually want this, or there should be more carrot and less stick? Or do you think they are ideologically committed to this, it's just they can't afford it?
Well, the political class in general has sort of painted itself into a corner on this, because the net zero pledge isn't just a sort of policy aspiration, it's actually enshrined in law. Governments have to legally do as much as they possibly can to get to net zero by 2050. That leaves politicians very little wiggle room. But as you say, they are waking up to the political reality of this. When they go down hard on a green policy which will affect people's bank balances, then the public rebel. And not just in the UK. We have seen this across Europe. Think of the Gilets jaunes protests in France, for example. We've seen the right come into power often in European countries, often because the left are pushing these green, expensive green policies so hard. Both parties are very well aware of that reality, but they've painted themselves into a corner with this law.
Another topic that's doing the rounds today, a big hoo-ha today, yesterday at Prime Minister's Question Time, around Brianna Ghey, the comment that Rishi Sunak made about doing U-turns. In fact, he was aiming at the net zero U-turn, the 28 billion U-turn, and said also about the women's rights, the trans rights stuff, which of course then kicked off majorly and caused a big hoo-ha. Penny Mordaunt, interestingly, has waded in today, hasn't she?
Yeah, this is all a bit of a sort of messy story. It's very difficult to get to the bottom of exactly what went on. So Rishi Sunak made this, perhaps you could say, slightly crass comment about the definition of a woman with Brianna Ghey, the transgender teenager who was murdered. Her mother was sitting in the gallery. Keir Starmer jumped on that immediately and said that it was incredibly insensitive of the Prime Minister. Now, from what I heard, Rishi Sunak was unaware that Brianna Ghey's mother was in the gallery, or hadn't quite taken it in, or something.
She wasn't actually in the gallery at the time.
Because she was a bit late for PMQs. And perhaps Rishi Sunak was aware of that, not quite clear. But basically, his instinct was to apologise, but he couldn't apologise because Kemi Badenoch doubled down on his position for him, tweeting saying that the Prime Minister had no need to apologise. So Rishi Sunak had no choice really but to follow her lead. Now Penny Mordaunt has made the situation more complicated by saying that the Prime Minister should apologise, and actually going further and saying, she said, that the Prime Minister was going to apologise. Yeah. Well, he hasn't yet. So is this all just turning into a bit of a mess?
Well, let's have a look at what Penny Mordaunt said earlier.
Whatever the rough and tumble of this place, whatever the pressures and mistakes that are made in the heat of political combat, we owe it to the people who sent us here to strive every day to make them proud of us and this place. The Prime Minister is a good and caring man. I'm sure that he has reflected on things, and I understand he will say something later today, or perhaps even during this session.
It does appear that Penny didn't get the memo, because Rishi went to Cornwall today promoting dentistry. He didn't apologise. He refused to apologise. He was asked multiple times by many media outlets. And many people might say, well, why should he apologise? I mean, the Parliament, the Commons, is the mother of all parliaments, the home of free speech. You should be able to say whatever you like. And the notion of weaponising who's in the gallery to affect what the Prime Minister or indeed anybody is allowed to say, that's a dodgy precedent.
Well, that was the argument that some Conservative MPs were making last night. I think, actually, Jacob Rees-Mogg on GBNews was saying that there's a clause in Irks and May which says that politicians shouldn't shouldn't reference people in the public gallery in order to influence political debate. And arguably, that is what Keir Starmer was doing. I mean, the other side of the coin is that, Brianna Ghey's mother has conducted herself with incredible integrity during the whole of this ordeal, and perhaps it was a bit crass of Rishi Sunak to make that comment. There is precedent for this. Theresa May made some accidentally, perhaps insensitive comment once at PMQs, and she did apologise. But it feels now a little bit as though the wind has gone out of the sails, and probably, I might be wrong about this, but by tomorrow it will have blown over. OK,
Olivia Early Super, thank you for joining us. I'm joined now by the former Labour MP, Bill Rammell, returning to our top story of the day. Hello, Bill, are you there? Thanks for joining us on the show. This is the story. Of course, Bill, welcome. We're talking today about the £28 billion net zero U-turn. There's a briefing going on right now, in fact, about what's due in the next Labour manifesto ahead of the general election. A key flagship policy dropped at the 11th hour. His opponents call him Sir Flip-Flop. This is the biggest U-turn of Sir Keir Starmer's career.
Well, the economic circumstances have clearly changed compared to when we made the pledge in 2021. The substance is still there, the commitment to home efficiency, the commitment to decarbonise the economy by 2030. But I think rightly we've recognised circumstances and we're not going to be hooked onto a specific figure, because our fiscal credibility after the chaos of the Tory years is hugely important. If I do have a criticism, it's that reaching the decision has taken too long. You know, this has been bandied about in the press for several weeks. And I think whilst you can take this time in opposition, you most certainly can't in government. And I think there's a lesson here and the front bench as a whole.
OK, Bill Rammell, thank you very much for your comments. What many people are saying is a huge, huge U-turn from Keir Starmer. We'll have lots more on Keir Starmer's latest U-turn, of course, at 4 o'clock. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. And you've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. Now it's time for our brand new Great British Giveaway and your chance to win £18,000 in cold, hard cash. Here's all the details that you need for a chance to make that Wonga yours.
We want to turn 2024 into 2020 more with your chance to win £18,000 in cash to spend however you like. You really could be the next big winner of our Great British Giveaway. Phil from West Yorkshire won our last one.
I never won a penny in my life.
Well, congratulations, you've won £10,000.
Oh my God, wow.
For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday, the 23rd of February. Good luck.
Next, we'll have all the latest on the police manhunt for Abdul Ezedi, which has entered, incredibly, its second week. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Earlier on Breakfast.
Maybe a reconciliation between the brothers, seeing as he was by himself in times of need? No, nothing, which is really, really sad.
We don't support war memorials being disrespected, and we don't support people covering their face to get away with committing criminal activity, and that's why we're announcing these changes today.
The one thing Elliot is right about is that there are rich people who are abusing loopholes to get away with this. That's what should be banned, not the tax itself.
Actually, the much better solution is simply to scrap inheritance tax.
A load of young women into Wembley Stadium, and I will stand there with a microphone going, "You are strong, independent women." Now do your maths properly. Get on with it.
From 6, it's Breakfast on GB News.
Hi, Rishi Sunak here. Join me for a special GB News People's Forum Live on Monday the 12th of February. I want to hear about the issues that matter to you. For your chance to be part of the audience and to put your questions to me, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com. See you there.
Welcome back. It's 3:25. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'll have a disturbing report on people who are being forced to live in homes with mould all over the walls. But first, the latest on the police's manhunt for Abdul Ezedi, which astonishingly has now entered its second week. Armed police executed 2 raids at addresses in Newcastle in the early hours of this morning, but no arrests were made. I'm now joined by our reporter Ray Addison, who's at News Scotland Yard. Ray, astonishing 2 weeks now into the second week of the manhunt. Britain's most wanted man simply vanished into thin air. What's the latest?
Well, police definitely throwing all their resources into this manhunt, Martin, and as we've been hearing, these 2 search warrants were executed last night in the North Tyneside area close to Newcastle city centre. Armed police going into 2 addresses. We don't know one of those addresses, but we do know that the second was Ezedi's place of work. That's Best Bite Pizza and Grill. It's in the Forest Hall area of Newcastle. It's a small parade of shops in a residential area in the community, and witnesses saying that last night about 11 p.m. police cars turned up and blocked off the road by parking across the road, and then armed officers ordered the people inside the Best Bite to come out with their hands up. Around 7 employees walking out, and then armed police went into the shop with perspex shields, presumably just in case there was any kind of corrosive fears of those corrosive liquids being thrown about. They spent 2 hours at the Best Bite, presumably searching for Ezedi. No arrests were made, and they also drilled through and kicked down the back door of a storeroom around the back of the Best Bite, presumably thinking this could be a place where Ezedi is familiar with. He's on the run and he wants somewhere to hide out, but obviously no sight of him at the moment. Those inquiries, those searches very much continuing both in London and now Newcastle, but one might assume from this that the focus is on the North Tyneside area at the moment. Of course, police saying yesterday they're now treating this as an attempted murder investigation. They do believe that Ezedi arranged to meet the 31-year-old victim last Wednesday, that maybe the attack was prompted by a breakdown in the relationship. But the last sighting, the last time he's been on camera is, like you said, over 7 days ago, 8 days ago now, 11 o'clock in London, as he was going over Vauxhall Bridge onto Vauxhall Bridge Road and then Grosvenor Road. But since then, no sightings, and police very, very keen to hear from anyone who might have seen him.
Ray, a huge amount of detail coming out about Ezedi, as you said. His criminal past, 3 sexual offences, on the sex offenders register for 10 years, yet still granted asylum on his 3rd attempt, thanks to a miraculous conversion to Christianity. We know that he drinks Red Bull during Ramadan. We know he likes Jaffa cakes. We know everything about him apart from where he is. Ray, this is turning into a huge embarrassment now for the police, isn't it? £20,000 reward. A lot of people will be thinking, I can't even drive down a one-way street the wrong way without getting nicked. How on earth can somebody disappear into thin air in London, the most CCTV cameras in Europe, and now they're even searching up north? They're losing control of this, aren't they?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, they've got well over 100 officers and they've brought in specialists. So these are people who are experts in tracking people down. They've got counter-terrorism officers involved in this. Obviously, they're not treating it as a terrorist incident, but they're using that kind of expertise to try to track Ezedi down. But if you look at the route that he took, he's going all over London. He's going from south to north to east, back to south. And then when he's on foot, and they're obviously tracking him using this CCTV footage, he's going along the embankment, over one bridge, down a bit, back over the other direction, down a bit, and then he's really making them work to try and track him. Now, one thing I've been trying to figure out is that by some kind of design? Is he just, is he trying to confuse anyone who might be trying to track him, or is he just wandering around unsure of where to go or how to get in touch with anyone? We know he lost his mobile phone, left that in the car, and there's not that many payphones around anymore. So who could he call, and how many of us actually keep track of people's numbers anymore? I don't know anyone's number. I need my mobile in order to help me out on that. So is he just wandering? Has he found his way back to Newcastle, or has he found some help here with a community in London? All of these are questions which police are desperate to answer.
OK, thank you, Ray Addison, for that update. From New Scotland Yard, the national manhunt for Abdul Ezedi now turning to something of a national embarrassment. And there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. We'll hear from Prince William on his first public appearance since the King's cancer diagnosis was announced. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. It's 3:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says it's sad and wrong to link a comment he made about transgender people in the Commons yesterday with murdered teenager Brianna Ghey. Rishi Sunak is facing calls to apologise for making what Brianna's father described as dehumanising remarks. It's understood the family has been invited to meet the Prime Minister. Labour is to scale back its flagship Green Prosperity Plan in a major U-turn following months of uncertainty. It's understood Sir Keir Starmer will confirm the changes today, citing increased economic uncertainty since the policy was unveiled in 2021. Labour had planned to spend £28 billion every year on environmental projects. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said it was further evidence of the Labour leader's record on flip-flopping on major issues. But Labour MP for Selly Oak, Steve McCabe, told GB News that the Tories' economic mismanagement is to blame.
I think this is a reflection of the parlous state of our economy. I mean, you have to remember when these proposals were originally put forward, it was 2021. It was before Liz Truss had taken her wrecking ball to the British economy. And it was before the national debt had reached the unbelievable levels it's now at.
Armed police have searched 2 addresses in Newcastle in their hunt for chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. It's understood the warrants included his place of work, but no arrests were made. Ezedi is believed to be suffering from severe facial injuries, which could be life-threatening if left untreated. The last recorded sighting of him was near Vauxhall Bridge in London just after 11 p.m. last Wednesday. Anyone with information should contact the police. And molten lava is once again bubbling into the sky in Iceland, the country's 3rd volcano eruption in recent weeks. Bright orange lava can be seen spilling across roads near the popular Blue Lagoon thermal spa in the southwest of the country. Residents in the town of Grindavik have already been evacuated after an eruption in mid-January. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2602 and €1.1713. The price of gold is £1,611.32 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,617 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, Prince William has joked about the royal family's recent health problems. Well, Harry, he's already swanned off back to the States. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are
so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engines, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have 2 SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can turn down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
Yeah, the growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks, or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. It's 3:37. We've got lots coming up in this next hour. We're starting off with the story of the Prince William. Prince William has been attending an event and he's spoken out. He's spoken out about the situation of the royal health scare, and he was on fine form. He thanked the public for their support in his first public appearance since we found out, of course, that the King has cancer. Meanwhile, Prince Harry, well, he's back in the United States after one 30-minute meeting with his father. 30 minutes. And I'm joined now by GBNews presenter Pip Thompson. Pip, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. Pip, last night, William, regal, royal, looked ready to rule. The precise opposite of Harry, who swanned off, irrelevant, spare, pointless.
Harry, Martin, is back in the California sunshine today. He got back in the early hours of this morning, doing that, 10,000-mile round trip, wasn't it? In about 25 hours, I think he spent in the UK. Prince William, I'll get to him in a moment. Yes, he was on fine form last night, but really encouraging this from Macmillan Cancer Support about King Charles and his cancer diagnosis. King Charles is a patron of Macmillan Cancer Support, and they are saying this afternoon that his openness about his diagnosis means its information support pages saw 48,304 hits just on Monday when that news broke about King Charles's diagnosis. Now, that is a 42% increase on the same day last year and is the highest daily figure since at least March 2020. The charity's chief executive has been speaking, and she's saying by sharing his diagnosis so publicly at such an early stage, he will be encouraging others to come forward and speak to their GP if they're worried. So that's really good. And also this afternoon in the House of Commons, 83-year-old Labour MP Barry Shearman has been speaking. He was diagnosed with cancer, and he is reassuring King Charles that medical advances mean it isn't the end of the world, and has talked about what an active life he has led since he was diagnosed and wants to send the King good news about advances in treatments. And there was lots of people who wanted to send well wishes to the King last night through Prince William. Prince William, I think we can show you the pictures, wasn't just royalty in the room. There was also Hollywood royalty in the room. Take a look at this picture. That's not what I was going to talk about, but let's just listen into this.
For my father, especially in recent... I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you also for the kind messages of support for Catherine and for my father, especially in recent days. It means a great deal to us all. It's fair to say the past few weeks have had a rather medical focus, so I thought I'd come to an air ambulance function to get away from it all.
OK, so that was Prince William speaking to guests at this gala charity dinner for the London Air Ambulance last night. And he was also speaking to Tom Cruise. Hopefully we do have that picture, that photograph to show you. Tom Cruise is also a big supporter of the London Air Ambulance charity. They're trying to raise £15 million. So there was some real star power in the room last night. Now, that appearance by Prince William followed up on that investiture ceremony at Windsor Castle, where he was handing out honours. But now we're not going to see him for a few days. Half-term is looming. It's next week. He will be at home in the grounds of Windsor, where his wife Catherine, she is still convalescing after that abdominal surgery last week. And with half-term, they will, of course, be looking after their 3 children. And, of course, Martin, you did mention Prince Harry now back in California. What are we to make of it? Is it a case of baby steps now between him and the King? At least they did spend a little bit of time together. Will we see him back in the UK again? I think what is still very clear, though, is that the 2 brothers, at least for now, are very much estranged. But, you know, perhaps we know this with families. All families are dysfunctional, but time can be a great healer.
Well, Pip Thompson, I admire your optimism. Thanks for joining us and giving us that latest royal update. Great stuff. Now, still to come, I'll discuss claims from a wildlife charity that the countryside is racist. But first, in a new GB News series, Innovation Britain, we are looking at the success of British manufacturing around the country.
We've come to the oldest borough in England. It's Malmesbury.
That's correct. King Athelstan's gaff. If we would have had the Thames, I think we would have been London, but unfortunately we're not.
Unfortunately, we're not in London, no. We're in Malmesbury, and it might be one of the oldest places in the UK, but we've got actually a really brand new product here, Chris.
Yeah.
What have you guys designed?
Absolutely. So Sweetenham & Bradley, so we are a subcontract sheet metal company, but we're actually looking into making our own products now. This is a manhole guardian, so it's an arrest device to fit inside the manhole cover when you're working on it. So it will literally clamp inside the chamber of the manhole, enable people to still access, but more importantly, not fall into the manhole, which does happen. We actually developed this because we work on defib cabinets, we manufacture defib cabinets, we manufacture bleed kits. So it was a natural step for us to look into the safety industry. The problem arose, we took a concept, so we took a very rudimentary concept, which was some mild steel, rusty old mild steel box section, and then we actually used RadQuote and all of our software to be able to develop. I think it's quite a sexy product, but maybe, you know, sexy to me is not sexy to others. But it's a great looking product. It's lightweight. It's safe. You know, I mean, it will stop lots of accidents, and huge potential for the utilities industry, waterboards, construction, anywhere there's a manhole. UK is, you know, we should be making more as the UK. I'm a huge advocate for UK engineering. I think I explained to you earlier on, I've seen UK engineering go away offshore at times. I'm seeing it come back now. So it's important that companies like Sweetenham & Bradley, there's lots of them out there, can actually do their own thing as well.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day.
When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Next Monday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will appear in a special show on GB News. He'll be answering questions from you, the great British public, the only people, after all, who truly matter. And you can be in that audience. Simply scan the QR code you can see on your screen right now in the bottom right there, or go to gbnews.com/PM. GB News People's Forum, the Prime Minister, will be live and exclusive at 8 p.m. next Monday evening. Make sure to tune in. This is your chance to hold the Prime Minister to account. Now, at 4 o'clock, I'll get more reaction to Sir Keir Starmer's latest U-turn, as this time he ditches his flagship green policy, a £128 billion U-turn. But first, here's a question for you. Is the countryside racist? Well, that's what a wildlife charity is claiming. The Wildlife and Countryside Link says the British countryside is a racist colonial white space. The group includes the RSPCA, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and, of course, the National Trust. Well, I can now speak with historian and broadcaster Rafe Heidel-Manku. Rafe, always a pleasure to have you on GB News. Some people will be rolling their eyes, other people will be throwing their croissants. Here we go again. Everything is racist. This time, the countryside.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever wanted proof that we're living now in Britain in a post-revolutionary society where our institutions have been completely captured by, you know, these sort of ideological apparatchiks who want to transform our country, well, this case, I think, is a prime example. You know, the trustees of this organization include those who work on land justice and decolonizing conservation. So this is not in any way a neutral body. We mustn't think of it like that. It's absolutely rotten and biased to its core. But most stupidly of all, this Wildlife and Countryside Link, the organization that says the countryside is a racist, colonial white space, they don't employ a single non-white person. I went to their website, all 11 employees are white. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, of course, unless you're preaching to others for excluding white people. So maybe they want to reflect first on whether they're a colonialist, racist white space before they accuse others of that. And I don't want to stereotype them, but they all seem to be drawn from that same type of pool that we're so familiar with from Just Stop Oil protests. These are young middle-class university graduates who seem to have far more in common with, say, the metropolitan elite than with our country folk.
Yeah, and Rafe, I've got to say, when you look at these people, I've never seen more white people in one place since the Remainer March. And isn't that the point? This is basically privileged, white, middle-class people, not only self-flagellating, but try and make the rest of us feel guilty about our mere existence. And Rafe, the last time I checked, there are literally no barriers to people of colour getting involved in the countryside.
Exactly. You know, I mean, they've declared that as a problem, the fact that Britain's green spaces are built with white British cultural values. Well, gosh, you know, I mean, you know, knock me down with a feather. Who could have imagined a nation founded and created by white British people would have white British cultural values? But the fact that they say that strikes at the core of this issue, as you've just said. These race zealots don't care a bit about ethnic minorities. This is about their visceral hatred for Britain and for the West. And the British people are being demoralized in a prolonged sort of war of attrition now from all of our institutions that seek to undermine our culture and our way of life. And, you know, every day it seems almost there's another institution telling the British people, you're racist, your history is racist, your culture is racist, your national heroes are racist, and now even your countryside is racist. And you sort of have to ask, why are they attacking the countryside? Well, it's quite clear. It's because if you're English, Scottish, Welsh, or Northern Irish, the countryside defines your identity. When you ask them to think about what England means to an Englishman, they always think about the pastoral landscape of, you know, England's green and pleasant land. It's a deeply important emotional part of our identity, the countryside, and it links us to the nation. And by calling the countryside racist, they're directly attacking our sense of nationhood and identity. I think it's very deliberate. And the other point to make is, of course, oh, sorry, I've run out of time.
No, keep going.
Yeah, the other point to make, of course, is, you know, my father was born in Kenya, Asian Sikh. Once in a while, they'd go for a picnic outside of Nairobi, but there were very few people doing that like him, and there were no black people doing that. I mean, I'm a member of the National Trust still and of the Royal Horticultural Society. I go to houses and gardens around the countryside. I've been very interested to see in the last few years a large number of ethnic minorities are now visiting, but they're Indian, Chinese, and Japanese. Black people aren't going out into the countryside, maybe because it's difficult to get out of the cities, but also these are cultural issues within those communities. They may not have the same interest in going out to the countryside. It was reported last year that 95% of black people can't swim. These are cultural issues that have nothing to do with the white population being oppressive, but these are just for the historical or whatever reasons within those communities. They don't have the same interests. Going into the countryside is still primarily a white middle class activity. You know, white working classes are also underrepresented there too. So the idea to try to focus everything on race is so divisive to our society and our culture.
Absolutely. You know, and if you flip the language and play their games, you could say this. Many parts of inner city Britain are black, Asian and Muslim spaces where white people are out of place. Cultural barriers exist which prevent white people engaging with them. They are dominated by non-whites. Now, if I said that, I'd be called a total knuckle-dragging racist. Yet that's the kind of language that they are using, Rafe. Basically, they are the racists. Rafe Hadelmanku, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is performing yet another U-turn by ditching a £28 billion Green pledge. I'll bring you more reaction from Labour and Tory MPs. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Further snow to come during the rest of today in the north, but rain generally elsewhere, and it is turning milder from the south. What we've seen during the day is mild Atlantic weather trying to push in from the south, cold air sitting to the north, and in between the band of rain, mixing and turning to sleet and snow in places. But through the evening, overnight, the snow will increasingly become confined to higher parts of northern England, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further disruption possible, but at lower levels, mostly it's rain and a very mild end to the night across southern parts with some heavy showers moving through. Cold in the far north of Scotland with further snow showers, another centimetre or two. But really, we're following on Friday morning this band of rain, sleet and hill snow as it pushes north into much of Scotland, the far north of England and Northern Ireland. The snow becoming confined to the very tops of the hills for Northern Ireland and Northern England before eventually rain takes over. But further disruptive snow is likely across eastern Scotland, increasingly so later Friday, whilst it's rain further south. Further showers coming into much of central and southern England as well as Wales, and that's how we're looking on Saturday morning. Very mild across England and Wales, some sunny spells but also a few showers. Further disruptive snow for eastern Scotland before eventually the cold weather becomes confined to the far north of Scotland, much milder this weekend elsewhere.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right.
Growth.
And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, 1 year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen to the highest since the Attlee government way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Hi, I'm Peter Andre. Join myself and Ellie Costello this Saturday morning on Saturday Morning Live, where we have a very special guest. Yeah, she just happens to be my wife.
I am so excited to join you guys, and yes, I'll be talking all about my new book, teaching kids how to maintain good mental health as they grow up.
Dr. Emily, she's an NHS doctor and an author, and she's written this amazing book, Healthy Mind, Happy You. So, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. till 12 p.m. See you then. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Today, I've got news of another Sir Keir Starmer huge U-turn, and this time he's ditching one of his few big policies, £148 billion U-turn, in fact. Next, the government's planning a crackdown, and that means if pro-Palestinian protesters climb all over a war memorial again or even wear masks, they could be sent to jail. But do the old bill have the guts to enforce it? And there's also the latest on the manhunt for Abdul Ezedi as armed police raid 2 addresses in Newcastle. The manhunt for Abdul Ezedi, the national manhunt, now becoming something of a national embarrassment. And with the sobering news that an average of 50 veterans take their own life every year, we've been with Greater Manchester Police, who have launched a new and amazing scheme locating and supporting people who go missing. And that's all coming in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Thanks for your company. Please get in touch all the usual ways. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. What do you make of this £148 billion U-turn from the Labour Party? Sir Keir Starmer's flagship policy was desperately needed on Tuesday. Now on Thursday, it's desperately ditched. Do you trust anything they say? Also, Penny Mordaunt, is she on manoeuvres? She's having a pop at the Prime Minister over the Brianna Ghey fallout. Get in touch all the usual ways, but first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom today. The Prime Minister has said it's sad and wrong to link a comment he made about transgender people in the Commons yesterday with the murdered teenager Brianna Ghey. Rishi Sunak is facing calls to apologise for making what Brianna's father described as a dehumanising remark concerning the correct definition of a woman. It's understood the family's been invited to meet the Prime Minister, and he told reporters today he was making a very clear point.
Like everyone, I was completely shocked by Brianna's case. To have your child taken from you in such awful circumstances is almost impossible to come to terms with. To use that tragedy to detract from the very separate and clear point I was making about Keir Starmer's proven track record of multiple U-turns on major policies because he doesn't have a plan, I think is both sad and wrong, and it demonstrates the worst of politics.
Rishi Sunak. Now, armed police have searched 2 addresses in Newcastle in their hunt for chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. It's understood the search warrants included his place of work, but no arrests were made. Ezedi's believed to be suffering from severe facial injuries which could be life-threatening if left untreated. The last recorded sighting of him was near Vauxhall Bridge in London, just after 11 o'clock last Wednesday evening. He's been on the run for a week now. Anyone with any information should contact police. Protesters who cover their faces to avoid arrest could face tough penalties under new laws unveiled today. Demonstrators would also be blocked from climbing war memorials or letting off flares. Citing the right to protest will no longer be an excuse for causing major disruption, as the Home Office seeks to crack down on what it's calling dangerous disorder. Critics say the new powers represent a threat to civil liberties. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told the Commons that radical behaviour won't be tolerated.
Now, the right to protest is fundamental to our democracy, but where we see people hurling racist abuse, desecrating national memorials of great significance to our country, or taking flares to marches in order to cause disruption and fear, the only reasonable response is outrage and disgust. Tolerating these actions would be radicalising in itself.
Tom Tugendhat. Now, Labour is to scale back its flagship green spending plan in a major U-turn following months of uncertainty. It's understood Sir Keir Starmer will confirm the changes today, citing increased economic uncertainty since the policy was unveiled in 2021. Labour had planned to spend £28 billion every year on environmental projects. The Prime Minister said it was further evidence of the Labour leader's record of flip-flopping on major issues. Labour MP for Selly in Birmingham, Steve McCabe, told GB News the Tories' economic management is to blame.
I think this is a reflection of the parlous state of our economy. I mean, you have to remember when these proposals were originally put forward, it was 2021. It was before Liz Truss had taken her wrecking ball to the British economy. And it was before the national debt had reached the unbelievable levels it's now at.
NatWest has appointed former UBS executive to lead its high net worth banking arm, Coutts. Emma Crystal will take the top job, reporting directly to NatWest's interim chief executive, Paul Thwaite. It's understood she'll also join the board. It comes more than 6 months after the resignation of Peter Flavel in the wake of Nigel Farage's Coutts banking scandal. Weather news, and snow is blanketing parts of the country today as a new cold spell settles in. Dozens of schools had to be closed as forecasters warn that up to 25 centimetres of snow could fall in elevated areas. Amber warnings for snow are in place in parts of northern England and northern Wales. Yellow warnings for the rest of the UK as well. The Met Office says the worst is expected later on today, with snowy conditions moving further north tomorrow. And in Iceland, molten lava is once again bubbling up, with smoke clouds seen floating up into the sky as the country's third volcano eruption in recent weeks takes place. Bright orange lava can be seen spilling across roads near the popular Blue Lagoon geothermal spa in the southwest of the country. Residents of the nearby town of Grindavik have already been evacuated after an eruption in mid-January. Officials have been working to divert lava flows away from homes and key infrastructure since November, amid fears that further eruptions could destroy nearby towns. For the very latest news stories, do sign up to GB News Alert, scan the QR code on the screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now we start with yet another U-turn by Sir Keir Starmer, and this time he's ditching a cherished flagship policy. Labour confirmed today that it's abandoning its policy of spending £28 billion every year on environmental projects. Sir Keir is expected to say the pledge is being scaled back because of changes in the economic landscape since it was unveiled in 2021. That's shorthand for he's going to blame the Conservatives. And meanwhile, the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, has made some very interesting comments about Rishi Sunak after the Prime Minister's trans joke aimed at Sir Keir Starmer yesterday. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, thanks for joining us. Let's start with Penny Mordaunt. So yesterday, a clumsy exchange, which has become this big hoo-ha about trans rights. And then, for some strange reason, Penny Mordaunt has stepped in, and she seems to be acting like she's the leader, not Rishi Sunak. The question is, was it a gaffe, or is she going for his throat?
Yeah, just remind viewers and listeners what it was. Esther Jai, the mother of Behenna Jai, who was, of course, killed, and she was trans. She was in the gallery watching down during PMQs yesterday, and in a list of 30 U-turns the Tories say Labour have done, Mr Sunak said that he couldn't, Keir Starmer, couldn't define what a woman was, and we went through 99% of a U-turn. Keir Starmer got really upset about that because he was due to meet with Esther Jai shortly and knew that she was in the gallery above. Sort of all the week to say that, how could you say it now? Mr Sunak at the end of the session apologised and obviously didn't apologise but merely recognised Esther Jai's compassion in the face of evil. She's the very best of humanity, and so it goes on. Moving on today, still no apology from the Prime Minister, but in today, Leader of the House of Commons questions, Penny Mordaunt waded in. Here's what she had to say.
Whatever the rough and tumble of this place, whatever the pressures and mistakes that are made in the heat of political combat, we owe it to the people who sent us here to strive every day to make them proud of us and this place. The Prime Minister is a good and caring man. I'm sure that he has reflected on things, and I understand he will say something later today, or perhaps even during this session.
See, the thing about that, right, it sounded very matronly, it sounded very patronising, and the big problem for a lot of people have, a lot of Conservative voters have, they feel that Penny Mordaunt's stance on trans issues is out of kilter with the party anyway.
This goes back to the leadership campaign in July 2022, when her campaign was basically hold below the waterline. And there were about self-ID, whether you could declare to change gender without having a certificate or a letter from the doctor. You saw there, I mean, that was really, those are notes she read. Now, over in Cornwall, where the PM was today, he made very clear he wasn't going to apologise for what he said. He was making a fair comment about U-turns made by Sir Keir Starmer. So you have got this tension now. It's now turned day two of this issue about what the PM said in PMQ yesterday is now a split in the cabinet with someone who some think would be a better leader than Rishi Sunak, attacking him for what he said in the comments yesterday.
And so that's the point. Is this Penny Mordaunt spotting Rishi on a back foot, and rather than leaping to his defence, she's leaping to his attack? She's making a power play.
Well, Number 10 would say that Penny Mordaunt knew that Mrs Sunak was going to say something about this in Cornwall. It's clear that from those remarks, Ms Mordaunt wants him to go further and properly apologise. He hasn't apologised yet, and that pressure particularly hasn't gone away. People think Mrs Sunak should apologise for what was said.
In fact, we have a lawyer coming into the studio in about 4:30 who suggests maybe it was Starmer that should apologise because he broke Commons protocol by referring to the gallery and bringing people in. But let's leave that until...
It's not quite right either on the rules. You can refer to somebody above you in the gallery. It didn't used to be the case, as long as it's relevant to the conversation.
But the devil's in the detail. We're going to that at 4:30, but for now, let's get on to this Starmer U-turn, a £28 billion U-turn, a screeching handbrake turn of a U-turn. This is a huge policy. Ed Miliband was all over this. So was Starmer. They were going to be the greener, purer, better party. Chris, they've had to throw it by the wayside. What's going on?
Let's remind listeners and viewers what happened. Back in 2021, Rachel Reeves set out plans to spend £28 billion a year, every year of the Labour government, on environmental projects. That was scaled back more recently to £28 billion in the second half of the first 5-year term of a Labour government. We are expecting news on that today. We don't know what it is yet. There should be news within this programme. I'll be back with the news when it breaks. But we are expecting some watering down of that commitment. We don't know what it is yet. It's been reported elsewhere that he'll be a U-turn. We're not sure if it's a U-turn or a kind of L-shaped turn. We're not sure what the shape of what's happening is, but I'll bring the news as soon as I can straight to viewers and listeners. It's causing a bit of a row already. Unite leader Sharon Graham, a big union funder, says that this is endless promise of jam tomorrow. Barry Gardiner, left-wing MP, said this is strategically incompetent to act as the pledge. John McTernan is a former advisor to Tony Blair. He says that this is a most stupid decision made by the leadership for since whenever. He didn't say when, but he thinks it's a mistake. The problem that critics of Starmer would have is, if you're going to drop this, what's the point of voting Labour? Why are you different to what the Tories would do?
OK, well, we heard earlier on from Labour MP Steve McCabe. He spoke to us earlier and he defended, as you'd expect, Sir Keir Starmer's decision.
You have to remember, when these proposals were originally put forward, it was 2021. It was before Liz Truss had taken her wrecking ball to the British economy. And it was before the national debt had reached the unbelievable levels it's now at. Obviously, what we're not backing down on is the need to have the green transition as an essential part of restoring and rebuilding our economy. What we're saying is we can't give a commitment to that level of borrowing now because it seems unlikely it will be affordable. We're talking here about 28 billion. I don't know how easy it is for people to visualise that sort of figure. But it has to be set against a national debt that's now at 2.6 trillion.
Steve McCabe earlier. Chris, it's all kicking off about Sir Keir.
Yeah, my phone's going mad. What's going to happen shortly when this news is announced, whatever it is, we'll see a lot of Tory attacks, or what they'll say is flip-flopping Keir Starmer. Michael Gove, just quickly, the senior figure in government, he says, brave Sir Keir runs away again. The invertebrate shows he has no plan and there's no principle he won't ditch. He's a jellyfish of politics, transparent, spineless, and swept along by the tide. Labour will take us back to square one. The Tories are going to have a real go Labour when this happens.
Superb, and it's all going to happen on this show in the next hour. Thank you very much, Chris Hope. And I'm joined now by Conservative Member of Parliament for Rother Valley, Alex Stafford. Alex, welcome to the show. I don't know if you heard that there. Michael Gove getting on a warpath here. Sir Keir Starmer, an invertebrate, a jellyfish, no backbone, as he's poising himself for the biggest U-turn even of that career.
Well, it's just frankly embarrassing and completely sums up the leadership of Keir Starmer. What does he stand for? Genuinely, what does he believe? What does he want to achieve and do as a politician? Again and again, we're seeing U-turns, flip-flops. As soon as it hits a bit of hardness, he just runs away. I mean, it's embarrassing, frankly, absolutely embarrassing for him.
But Alex, he's blaming you guys. He's saying there's no money left. He would like to do it, but the biscuit tin's empty. So, actual fact, it's your fault.
Apparently so, but he was saying it, his team was saying it literally yesterday and the day before and the day before that and the day before that they were cracking on with this. And in fact, the economic situation has vastly increased since last year. So actually there's more headroom for spending. But fundamentally, the plans were poorly calculated. When the Treasury looked at them quite recently, he worked out that actually the money needed was far more than the £28 billion Keir Starmer wanted to spend. So when they did it originally, they got their sums completely wrong. Sums up Labour, incompetent with economics. And then when it comes back to Rocky Road, they run away from any issue. It really is embarrassing for Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and the whole Labour leadership.
And what are we expecting to hear on this? Are we expecting to see a total abandonment of this flagship green policy? Or are we expecting to see it more watered down than the beer in a dodgy nightclub?
Well, I imagine he's going to water it down. The big question is he wants to get to his target by 2030 for climate change. He can't do that without spending vast amounts of money. So you can't basically say, I'm still committed to cutting our emissions so vastly, so quickly, without spending a huge amount of money. So what we're expecting, once again, is him to try and claim that his pledge, what he wants to achieve, is going ahead. But once again, with no financial backing to sort of back it up. It just makes his ideas pie in the sky. I mean, once again, Labour just do not understand economics and how to do things. And because they've written this plan originally on the back of a fag packet, how are they going to achieve that? Well, they have no idea when it comes to the economy and how to get through this.
And Alex, I need to quickly ask you about Penny Mordaunt earlier on, saying Rishi Sunak has had time to reflect on things. Who's in control? This sounds like a power play by her.
Well, I wasn't in the chamber, but I saw the clip. I don't think it's a power play at all. I think clearly everyone is backing Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, from our team. We want him to succeed. I think Penny was just underlining the point that actually, when it comes to the hustle and bustle of House of Commons, Rishi Sunak was making a point, which was proven today, that Keir Starmer just flip-flops and doesn't trust anything. And that is just, once again, what Keir Starmer is doing. He says one thing one day to one group, next day he's saying something else, next day doing something else. You can't trust him. You cannot trust Starmer at all.
OK, Alex Stafford, Conservative MP for Rother Valley, thanks for joining us. We're expecting much more detail on this story later in the show. Loads more on Labour's big U-turn at 5 o'clock. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. You've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. Now it's time for the Great British Giveaway, and you really could be our next winner with 18 grand in cold, hard cash, all from us. Do you fancy a chance to get your hands on that dosh? Well, here's all the details that you need to enter.
There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won in the latest Great British Giveaway. Totally tax-free cash that you could do whatever you like with. That works out to be an extra £1,500 to play with each month for a whole year. Money to make each month just that little bit better. You could put it towards monthly treats, save it for a rainy day, or just use it to take the pressure off in 2024. For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Now, armed police have raided 2 addresses in Newcastle as part of their search for chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. Britain's biggest manhunt is now turning into a huge embarrassment for the police. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that.
Yeah.
And I just think, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods
and
are
remember,
being
a lot of
trashed.
people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something.
Right.
And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. I am all for green protests, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. Lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you say
can't
you
get any more
support some of
obvious.
these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message.
Any of them.
But I do appreciate the message. But sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Hi, Rishi Sunak here. Join me for a special GB News People's Forum Live on Monday the 12th of February. I want to hear about the issues that matter to you. For your chance to be part of the audience and to put your questions to me, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com. See you there.
Welcome back. 4:23. It's all kicking off. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, in a few minutes, I'll ask whether Sir Keir Starmer broke the rules when he clashed with Rishi Sunak at PMQs yesterday. Now, finally, the government is clamping down on protesters who wear face masks or desecrate our war memorials. They're proposing tough new laws that will give police in England and Wales the power to arrest people who cover their faces in a bid to avoid prosecution. Who can forget the sickening scenes in November when pro-Palestine protesters climbed on the Royal Artillery Memorial and the police simply stood by and did absolutely nothing? Well, under the government's new plans, people who scale those monuments could be jailed for 3 months and fined up to £1,000 for the privilege. Well, to discuss this, I'm now joined by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, forgive my cynicism. Sounds great on paper, but have the police got the guts to actually enforce this stuff?
Well, that's one of a number of questions I think many people are going to have off the back of this announcement. If this sounds all a bit familiar, that's because it is. Yeah. Last year, the government also attempted to introduce a raft of measures designed to crack down on antisocial behaviour during protests via the Public Order Act. The measures announced today are doing something similar, really, banning firecrackers, the use of firecrackers at protests, enabling the police to fine those who wear masks and face coverings up to £1,000, and specifically ruling out making illegal climbing on war memorials. The question is, is there the police will to actually do this? Because what we've seen before is that the Met Police has been pretty soft on protests. And actually, a couple of months ago, Rishi Sunak wrote to the Assistant Chief Commissioner, Mark Rowley, and reminded him of the powers that the police have to crack down on antisocial behaviour. So whether there is much point in introducing a whole range of new measures if the police are unwilling to use them, it isn't really clear. The other question is, does the police actually have the capacity to do any of this? The Met Police is already stretched to breaking point with these protests. £27 million has been spent already, and on a number of occasions the force has been forced really to call in officers from around the country as backup. So the idea that they will be able to pick out mask wearers in a crowd, and I've been to some of these protests reporting there are a lot of mask wearers, and find them on the spot or arrest them, seems a little bit fanciful from where I'm sitting.
Olivia Utley, I think you're entirely right. I've also been on those protests. I've seen the police stand by and do nothing, simply watch on, even by the cenotaph, people with full face coverings, pro-Palestine protesters. I was saying to police myself, what are you going to do? Going to arrest this guy? They said, oh, nothing we can do, mate. Well, they've got the new laws, they've got the bill. Have they got the will? That's the big question. That's the question that remains to be seen answered on the streets. And talking of which, now to the latest on the police's hunt for Abdul Ezedi, which astonishingly has now entered its second week on. Police executed 2 raids at addresses in Newcastle in the early hours of this morning. One of the places they raided was the pizza shop where Ezedi used to work, but no arrests were made. Well, I'm joined now by our reporter, Ray Addison, who's at News Scotland Yard. Ray, welcome to the show. Astonishing that this has entered its second week. Equally astonishing, Britain's biggest manhunt, Ray, is now turning into something of a national embarrassment for the police.
Well, the police focusing their searches last night in the North Tyneside area, 2 addresses associated with Abdul Ezedi on this, the 7th, well, it's the 8th day now last night, the 7th day since that attack, that chemical attack in London. Now, one of the addresses was Best Bite Pizza and Grill. It's a restaurant, a small takeout in a parade of shops in a residential area in North Tyneside. Police turned up about 11 o'clock last night. They blocked off the road to stop any oncoming traffic, and then from outside the shop they ordered everyone who was inside to come out with their hands up. Well, around 7 members of staff did that, witnesses tell us, and then armed police entered the shop with riot shields, or Perspex riot shields, in order to protect themselves, presumably from any kind of corrosive substances which might be coming their way should Ezedi be inside. They spent 2 hours there searching for him, including a store cupboard or storeroom around the back of the Best Bite. They used a drill to get that, to knock that door down and search within the premises there. But of course, they haven't been able to find him. The other address, presumably no sign of him too, and certainly no arrests or no sign of anybody committing any kind of offences. As you were saying, it's the 8th day now, and we've got this manhunt which is stretching from London all the way to the north of England to Newcastle, but also, you know, police telling us that they've put out an all ports alert as well. And so, you know, all airports, everybody has been informed to look out for Ezedi to see if he might be trying to leave the country. But really, I think at this stage, police simply do not know where he is.
Ray Addison, News Scotland Yard, thank you for that update. You know, I just can't get my head around this story. Where Ezedi was last spotted at Vauxhall Bridge Road, this is a true story. I once dropped a cigarette and a bloke was over to me like a rat up a drain pipe with a body cam. I got a ticket on the spot. You can't drive down a street in London without getting a ticket. You can't move without being surveyed on CCTV. And yet this guy simply disappears in a puff of smoke. And I think, Ray, the fact that they're now centering on Newcastle as well as London and that £20,000 reward shows they're not homing in at all. They're casting their net wider, and that's because they don't have adequate leads. Ray Addison, thank you for that update live from Scotland Yard. Let me know what you think about this national manhunt. Is it turning into a national embarrassment? Abdul Ezedi, don't forget, third attempt granted asylum on the sex offenders register for 3 separate offences for 10 years. Yet still granted the right to remain, commits this heinous crime and now simply vanished. It's an astonishing story. We'll have more on that, of course, throughout the show. There's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. Rishi Sunak is under fire for his comments in PMQs yesterday. But is Keir Starmer the one who should actually apologise because he was in the wrong? We'll have that after your latest news headlines from Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour, as you've been hearing, armed police have searched 2 addresses in Newcastle in the hunt for chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. It's understood the search warrants included his place of work. No arrests, though, were made. Ezedi is believed to be suffering from severe facial injuries, which could be life-threatening if left untreated. The last recorded sighting of him was near Vauxhall Bridge in London, just after 11 o'clock last Wednesday evening. Anyone with any information to his whereabouts should contact police. In other news, the Prime Minister says it's sad and wrong to link a comment he made about transgender people in the Commons yesterday with the murdered trans teenager Brianna Ghey. Rishi Sunak is facing calls to apologise for making what Brianna's father described as a dehumanising remark concerning the correct definition of a woman. It's understood the family has been invited to meet the Prime Minister. And protesters who cover their faces to avoid arrest could face tougher penalties under new laws being unveiled today. Demonstrators would also be blocked from climbing war memorials or letting off flares. Citing the right to protest will no longer be an excuse for causing major disruption, as the Home Office seeks to crack down on what it calls dangerous disorder. Critics say the new powers represent a threat to civil liberties. And Labour is set to scale back its flagship green spending plan in a major U-turn following months of uncertainty. It's understood Sir Keir Starmer will confirm the changes today, citing increased economic uncertainty since the policy was unveiled in 2021. Labour had planned to spend £28 billion every year on environmental projects. The Prime Minister said it was further evidence of the Labour leader's record of flip-flopping on major issues. And in Iceland, molten lava is once again bubbling up, with smoke clouds seen floating up into the sky in the country's 3rd volcanic eruption in recent weeks. Bright orange lava can be seen spilling across roads near the popular Blue Lagoon geothermal spa in the southwest of the country. Residents of the nearby town of Grindavik have already been evacuated from their homes after an eruption in mid-January. Officials have been working to divert lava flows away from homes and key infrastructure since then. For the very latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on the screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, the fallout from Rishi Sunak's transgender joke is rumbling on and on. But did Sir Keir Starmer break parliamentary rules yesterday? And is it he who should apologise? I'll be joined by a lawyer who thinks that that is the case. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger. And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:37. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Later this hour, I'll have news of a new police initiative aimed at helping vulnerable veterans. It's magnificent. But before that, more now on the huge fallout from Rishi Sunak's comment about Sir Keir Starmer refusing to say what a woman is that has caused a huge storm. And what I'm asking this afternoon is this: did the Labour Party leader break parliamentary rules during PMQs? Before that, here's a reminder of how it all unfolded yesterday lunchtime.
Mr. Speaker, this week the unwavering bravery of Brianna Jay's mother, Esther, has touched us all. As a father, I can't even imagine the pain that she's going through, and I'm glad that she's with us in the gallery here today.
Defining a woman, although in fairness that was only 99% of a U-turn. The list goes on, but the theme is the same, Mr. Speaker. It's empty words, broken promises, and absolutely no plan.
Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber, shame. Parading as a man of integrity when he's got absolutely no responsibility.
Well, it all kicked off and it's still rumbling on. Apologies being demanded left, right and centre from the Labour Party and the media. But, of course, Rishi hasn't apologised. And to discuss whether Sir Keir Starmer broke the rules, I'm now joined by the barrister and writer Stephen Barrett. Stephen, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. We're talking about this, Stephen, of course, because you were very quick to point out last night, as you often are, that there may have been a breach of Commons protocol by Sir Keir Starmer. Can you set out what you mean by that?
Yes, I mean, so quick that I made an error and accidentally posted the rules for the House of Lords first. But even that is informative, because we've had a long-standing constitutional rule that you don't mention who's in the public gallery, and you don't grandstand, and you don't do anything dramatic about it. The House of Lords has protected that rule completely. The House of Lords has a very simple rule, a really simple, workable rule. The House of Commons has modified it, and to the extent that one of the MPs tweeted me to say that they'd repealed it. Now, they haven't repealed it. They still have this rule, but they have modified it. They've said that you can mention somebody in the public gallery, but you must not do so in order to intimidate people. Now, what Keir Starmer did was mention the Prime Minister's quote, what he said. Then he raised the person in the public gallery, so he's done that, and then he attacked the Prime Minister's integrity. And he pointed and he said, shame. Now, I don't know about you, but nobody has ever pointed at me and cried the word shame without an intention to intimidate. It's not really a friendly thing to do. Very few of my friends have done it. It doesn't really happen down the pub. If somebody points at you, says that you have no integrity and shames you in public, then I think that that is an attack upon your integrity. And that is a breach of the parliamentary rules. The Speaker of the House of Commons did nothing. Now, there are many reasons why that may be. One of my pet bugbears is that we've made laws fat and flabby, and as a result, we don't really understand them. And because we don't really understand them, we can't really enforce them. So it may simply be that that's going on. When that MP tweeted me that the rule had been repealed, he probably did so in all good conscience, believing that the rule had been repealed. Because they mention them now so often that they may well have just forgotten that they have rules. When they're made an MP, they're given a copy of all these rules. But how many of them read them? And, you know, in all honesty, are the rules being applied? This looks to me like a very serious rule breach by Keir Starmer to try and publicly shame his political opponent, which is not allowed, for good reason. Political debate in this country cannot descend to the level of shame-mongering.
And, Stephen, the rules you refer to, they're called the Rules of Behaviour and Courtesies in the House of Commons, and it's point 29. Anybody can go and look at this right now. Specifically states it must not be phrased in a certain way that might intimidate or seek to influence the debate, which it clearly has, because it's moved the debate on into a huge public shaming around trans issues. But, Stephen, a broader point I'd like to raise is, are we looking down the thin end of a wedge here of potentially the gallery being weaponised? Now, we've seen this as an effective way of shaming people around issues who'd rule out, for example, a Labour Party MP welcoming somebody into the gallery who'd lost a relative in Palestine and referring to that. Could we see the unsavoury protocol of the gallery being weaponised specifically to cause harm?
Well, this is what you get when you get rules collapse. Okay? Once a human society gets into a position where rules can't be enforced, you go to mob rule, you go to shaming, you go to deep emotional control and emotional manipulation. And there are people out there who will emotionally manipulate you. I mean, your viewers will know that there's an entire fraud industry largely based upon the concept of emotional manipulation. So it goes on all the time. We used to have rules to protect us from this. And clear and simple rules which are enforced are how you stop mob rule. If you don't don't do that, you will get mob rule. And everybody who thinks that they're in charge of mob rule, the guy pointing and crying shame, it comes back to bite you in the end. Every time this has happened throughout history, Savonarola famously did it in Italy, and he liked burning people alive with shame. Well, he ended up burnt alive. That's what happened. So either we restore clear, simple rules, and the House of Commons becomes a rules-based place again, because of course it isn't. It had its kangaroo court, you know, and it's got a bad relationship with rules. Either it restores its reputation and relationship with rules, or it's going to descend into this sort of shaming and mob rule.
And Stephen, it's worth pointing out that Rishi Sunak has been criticised with people within his own party as well. Penny Mordaunt was saying he's taken time to reflect and was intimating that maybe he should apologise. But very quickly, if we could, Stephen, do you think Sir Keir Starmer should apologise, and do you think he will?
What I will do, Martin, with your hopefully with your agreement and willing indulgence, is not express a view on whether or not he should apologise, because that is a personal political opinion. And I apply a rule to myself, a clear, simple rule, that I don't express those. And I am not going to say whether the Prime Minister should or shouldn't apologise. I'm not going to join the shame peddlers. That's not what I do. So I'm going to stay with the rules and with the rule of law.
OK, that's why we get you on the show. Apolitical, to the point. Stephen Barrett, excellent. Thank you very much for joining us on GB News. Certainly food for thought. Now I'll bring you a special report on how police are trying to help vulnerable veterans after this. It's an excellent initiative. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Now, next Monday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will appear in a special show on GB News. He'll be answering questions from you, the great British public, the only people who truly matter. And you can be in that audience. Simply scan the QR code on your screen right now. You can see it in the bottom right, or go to gbnews.com/PM. GB News People's Forum, the Prime Minister, will be live at 8 p.m. next Monday evening, only on GB News. Welcome back. It's 4:48. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now to a very sobering story. An average of 50 veterans take their own lives in the UK each year. And now Greater Manchester Police have implemented a new system named the Forcer Protocol in order to locate and support veterans who go missing. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper spoke to the founder of this massively important initiative.
If Alan truly knew the pain that he caused his family and his children, there's no way he would have done what he done to us.
In 2020, Alan Forcer, a father, a husband and a veteran, went missing. He had suffered with PTSD as a result of his time in the army, and sadly, like so many others, he'd decided to take his own life. Now, Alan's former wife, Claire, is ensuring better measures are in place for veterans that go missing to make sure they get the help they need before it's too late.
Between 1996 and 2018, there was 1,086 veteran suicides, which is roughly one a week somewhere in the UK. So it makes sense to find them as soon as possible and implement that care.
What's the circumstances leading to them going missing?
If a veteran does go missing, it's vital they're found and given help as soon as possible.
Is a missing person a veteran?
That's where the new Forcer Protocol, founded by Claire in Alan's memory, is hoping to have an impact.
Veterans will upload their information onto Safe and Found online. When that call then comes into the police, we now ask every person that's reported missing to us at Greater Manchester Police now whether they've served in the forces or whether they're currently serving. That allows us to capture who is a missing veteran.
Right now, around 3% of the population of Greater Manchester is made up of veterans. But with around 1.85 million veterans nationwide, there's clearly much more work to be done.
Manchester probably isn't the main area for veterans. You know, we don't have any garrisons, we don't have any real barracks within Manchester. So that's why it's so important for this protocol to be rolled out nationally. We've already had 42, but what are other places in the country, what volume are they getting?
When Alan was first reported missing, he was only deemed a medium risk, despite Claire highlighting his multiple health concerns to their local police force. 4 years later, and Claire is determined that the Forcer Protocol will give other veterans that go missing the treatment and support they deserve.
It gives them the chance, doesn't it? Prevention is ultimately the cure. Preventative measures are always kind of, you know, I'm a big believer in the saying, you know, we need to go up or downstream and find out why people are falling in. There's been several, if not tens of missed opportunities to implement care for our veterans that have been lost to suicide.
In just 3 months since its launch, the Forcer Protocol has located dozens of missing veterans in Greater Manchester alone. But it's hoped that this is just the beginning, both here and across the UK. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Oh, what a magnificent initiative. And I'm joined now by Lieutenant General Sir Andrew Gregory, who's the CEO of Sapper, which is an armed forces charity. Welcome to the show, sir. Forcer Protocol is an excellent initiative, but we need to do much, much more to protect veterans, don't we?
So firstly, Martin, I would commend enormously what Claire has done, the energy she's put into this and the way Greater Manchester Police have picked it up and trialled it. It's fantastic. And it is being rolled out more widely through something called Project Nova to reach people through the Forces Employment Charity and others. Every suicide is a tragedy. There is no doubting that. And the key issue is trying to get particularly veterans to reach out and talk to people. And in Sapper, the Armed Forces charity, we find they come to us so late, Martin. They're too proud to ask for help. They're too proud to admit they've got problems. So if we can get them to talk early to come to a charity like Sapper. We have a helpline called Forces Line, 0800 260 6767. We won't have all the answers, but we can help them on a journey back from the brink, because that's what we all want to do.
Magnificent stuff. I'm afraid simply because of time, let's have one more question. What do people need to... I mean, the thing about these things is they need to be relevant to armed forces people, don't they? They need to have that credibility, because so often men and women are afraid to reach out.
Completely agree. Here's a case study, not the individual's real name, a person called Tom. Multiple tours, Iraq and Afghanistan, left the army 2015, family business. When business went wrong, split up with his wife, lost touch with his daughter, thought of suicide, came to Sapper. We were able to help him, now back in touch with his daughter, working back in home. So it's those sort of things. My message is to any veteran, please, please come to a charity like Sapper before everything goes wrong.
OK, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. General Sir Andrew Gregory, thank you very much. Now, when life is difficult, Samaritans are here day or night, 365 days a year. You can call them for free on 116 123 or email them at joe@samaritans.org or visit samaritans.org to find your nearest branch. Please stick with us. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Further snow to come during the rest of today in the north, but rain generally elsewhere, and it is turning milder from the south. What we've seen during the day is mild Atlantic weather trying to push in from the south, cold air sitting to the north, and in between the band of rain mixing and turning to sleet and snow in places. But through the evening, overnight, the snow will increasingly become confined to higher parts of northern England, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further disruption possible, but at lower levels mostly it's rain and a very mild end to the night across southern parts with some heavy showers moving through. Cold in the far north of Scotland with further snow showers, another centimetre or two. But really we're following on Friday morning this band of rain, sleet and hill snow as it pushes north into much of Scotland, the far north of England and Northern Ireland. The snow becoming confined to the very tops of the hills for Northern Ireland and Northern England before eventually rain takes over. But further disruptive snow is likely across eastern Scotland, increasingly so later Friday, whilst it's rain further south. Further showers coming into much of central and southern England as well as Wales, and that's how we're looking on Saturday morning. Very mild across England and Wales, some sunny spells but also a few showers. Further disruptive snow for eastern Scotland before eventually the cold weather becomes confined to the far north of Scotland, much milder this weekend elsewhere.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat. Yep. Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. Now, we start this hour with an interview with Sir Keir Starmer. He's been talking about Labour's dramatic U-turn on their £28 billion Green Pledge. Not there. Well, I'm joined now...
Important commitments, green steel so that we can continue to make steel in this country, gigafactories so we can get the next generation of jobs when it comes to car manufacture, GBNews, which will be a publicly owned vehicle so that when we invest public money we get the yield back to the British taxpayer, and the National Wealth Fund, which will help get private investment in for the new jobs of the future. All of those commitments, every single commitment that I've made, is fully funded and remains in place, except for warm homes, which will unfortunately have to be carried out a little bit more slowly. What won't now happen is that we won't make further or new investment decisions, and that means that we won't reach the £28 billion envisaged, and that figure is effectively stood down. The reason for that is because since we announced the £28 billion, the Tories have done terrible damage to our economy, not just the Liz Truss budget, but also now the government briefing that it's going to max out on the government credit card. Reckless, but I have to anticipate the circumstances as they are now, not as I'd wish them to be.
Why is it taking you so long to come to this decision, though, to pin an arbitrary number, given that Liz Truss was Prime Minister, what, 18 months ago? Maybe you could have junked it then?
Well, since then, the government has said it's going to max out the credit card. So rather than think about what the economy needs, they're going to think about what they can desperately do as they go into election. That was briefed out just a few weeks ago. But look, I have gone through a process. I wanted to reassure myself that we could keep to the commitments that we've made, that they were the right commitments for the mission-led government that I want. That's taken a bit of time. Today is the day when the Shadow Cabinet need to get their proposals in for the manifesto fully costed. So today was the right day to conclude that process and come to a final decision.
A big element, around about half of the element of paying for what you want to do, is extending the windfall tax. What happens if that doesn't generate the money that you anticipate it might? Could we be standing on this balcony again and the whole thing gets watered down further?
Well, we've looked at the official figures in relation to energy prices. They're pretty clear, and so we're confident in relation to that. So the funding from this will be a large chunk from an extended windfall tax, and the other part from borrowing, because I do think that we need to borrow to invest and to invest to grow our economy, which is desperately needed.
Keir Starmer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
There we have it. Keir Starmer, the biggest flagship policy in his toolbox. It's been dramatically abandoned before the election. I'm joined in the studio by GBNews' political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, a huge U-turn, flagship policy, 28 billion quid, the Green Deal ditch. You've got it in your hands.
Here
right
it is.
there.
Yeah, it's 4
What's the
pages
detail?
long. It's the Labour's Green Prosperity Plan. It's not entirely ditched. What they've done is they have changed how they're going to spend. In broad terms, Martin, they plan to get to £28 billion a year to spend on green projects by the end of their time in the first 5 years in government, by 2029. That's been under pressure a lot from the Tory party. You've had different Labour front benches. They couldn't commit to it. What are they doing? Today, on the very day when all shadow cabinet must put in costed plans for the manifesto, today is the deadline, they've finally settled the row. They are saying here that rather than the £28 billion a year by the end of the first 5 years in government, it'll be 23.7 billion over 5 years. They've got there by dropping a plan to insulate as many as 19 million homes in the first decade. It'll be just 5 million in the first 5 years. So they've played here with money. They're funding that through increasing the funding from the... look at my notes here, forgive me. They're going to deal with the... money from the North Sea oil investment and the windfall tax and also some borrowing. But the big spending commitments have gone away, and that's why it's so interesting. And we have here a party which is trying to get ready for government on a serious level. And
it's a seriously humiliating flagship policy. They call themselves the Greenest Party. Ed Miliband is being forced into line, having to back this. It has to be a huge, huge humiliation. And yet, of course, they're blaming the Conservatives because there's no money left. Wait, that won't wash with the electorate,
They're
will it?
blaming the economy. They're saying the plan was set out in 2021. Now it's 2024. Things have changed. Liz Truss has been and gone in government. Labour would blame her policies for causing issues. But they are going to extend the windfall tax, raise 10.8 billion, and the rest 13 billion from borrowing. The Tories will get stuck into that. Already the Tories are attacking the plans. We've got Michael Gove calling him, Sir Keir Starmer, that is, an inveterate invertebrate, the jellyfish of politics, who believes stands for nothing. Sir Keir Starmer denied in a briefing we had earlier with Rachel Reeves next to him, but not Ed Miliband. So again, Ed Miliband apparently is on side with this. He has said in a statement to journalists just now that Labour will be fighting election with a world-leading agenda on climate and energy, with every single individual policy already announced, now confirmed for the manifesto. So no new policies to hit this idea of greening up the economy by 2030. Mr Miliband is yet to speak. He has made some remarks in the past, notably last summer, saying that some people don't want Britain to invest in the green economy. They want us to back down. But Keir, Rachel and I will never let that happen. This is him last summer. Britain needs this 28 billion a year plan, and that's what we are committed to. Well, they aren't now, and that's about 18 months later. So awkward questions overnight, I think, for Sir Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband.
On Tuesday, this was desperately needed. On Thursday, it's been desperately thrown to one side. Is this a case of project fantasy meets project reality? We can't afford this net zero agenda, and actually, does the electorate even want it, Chris?
It doesn't affect the net zero plan to get to net zero by 2050. I asked that question. It's an attempt here to try and use the greening of our economy as we move away from dirty industries into more wind energy and etc. They want to, and the so-called Great British Energy Company they want to set up. They want to try and help us all benefit and create jobs that way. Whether it works, we'll wait and see. But for me, it does show, this document here, this Green Prosperity Plan, shows a party which is shedding off promises that were unaffordable in opposition as it gets ready to being what should be the government by the end of the year, if the polls are right.
But we're in a situation where this week we discovered we can't even sell our offshore wind licences because wind power isn't returning the dividends that the energy companies want. Are we seeing a convergence here of we don't have enough money to invest in these technologies, and even if we do, they don't return the money? Is this the beginning, do you think, of a recalibration of our modern political obsession with net zero.
It's being more practical, certainly. I mean, people are not happy. Clive Lewis, a Labour MP, did a tweet just now showing him as Homer Simpson going back into the hedge, trying to sell this 28 billion figure on the doorstep. It's popular amongst many left-wing supporters of the Labour Party. Unite leader Sharon Graham, big funder, says that this is endlessly proves of the promises of jam tomorrow. Barry Gardiner, left-wing Labour MP, he says this is we strategically incompetent to axe the pledge. John McTernan, former advisor to Tony Blair, says this is the most stupid decision made by Sir Keir Starmer. What's happening here is you have got two parties going into the middle ground. And the problem, I think, for some people who would want this to remain on the Labour side is why vote Labour when this has been dropped?
And the bigger question is not only about net zero, but it's about trust. It's constantly thrown at Sir Keir Starmer that he's Mr. Flip-Flop. He's done more U-turns than a driving test centre. And here we are. This is the guy who's positioning himself as the Prime Minister in waiting. The biggest policy on his platform has been ditched.
And he knows he'll be called a flip-flopper. I can think back to the party conference, the Tory party conference in October, when I think the party chairman, Greg Hands, waved some flip-flops around saying this is the embodiment of Sir Keir Starmer. He knows that, but equally he knows they have to do something because the relentless questioning on this issue, driven by the Tory party and ministers there always talking about it, said they have to do something. But so the end result for our viewers and listeners is that millions of homes which were going to be insulated in this plan will now not be.
Interestingly, the Conservative Party at last have an attack route. They've been on the back foot, it seems, for so long. And yet, Chris, there is a feeling that amongst the electorate, the Conservatives themselves are still wedded to such policies. And maybe they would put them in if they had the money. They're falling out about scrapping boilers today.
That's right.
So do we have actually a political uni-party on this issue? And actually, do we need some points of difference?
Well, yeah, I mean, Butskillism in the 50s, when you had Hugh Gateskill and Rad Butler agreeing on economic policy, and that was seen to be a bad thing. I mean, there's a lot of agreement, basically. You have got a Tory government which passed through new laws to require manufacturers to make and sell a proportion of EV vehicles, despite the fact that infrastructure hasn't yet caught up. So I think there's a market, I think, for a party out there which can be practical and not go all in on these green policies. As we heard, probably, if I can say so, from Lee Anderson, the former deputy party chairman, to that popcorn event earlier this week, that idea of being practical, not punishing people as we go towards a kind of green economy.
And we've seen Port Talbot being wound down. We've seen up in Whitehaven a coal mine that was granted, Michael Gove in fact granted the licence for that, the full weight of the Green Movement, Ed Davey, Greenpeace.
Well, green steel is an idea which Sir Keir Starmer talked about. They have got ideas around this area. The Great British Energy Company, the £7.3 billion National Wealth Fund. But I mean, Sir Keir Starmer was saying it to us in briefings this afternoon, that essentially, when things change, I must change too, and Rachel Reeves agreed, and that's how companies deal with it. But in politics, it looks weak to change course, and that's what they've done. And we haven't yet heard publicly from Ed Miliband. Watch this space on GB News.
Great stuff. Well, Chris Hope, stick with us, because let's now go straight to Conservative MP for Dudley North, Marco Longhi. Marco, welcome to the show.
So, hello, Martin. Always good to see you.
And you, Captain. So listen, it was said all along, here he is, Mr. Flip-Flop, and before he's even in power, a screeching handbrake U-turn from Sir Keir Starmer on his net zero flagship policy.
As if we haven't seen this before, Martin. I mean, it's outrageous, really. It's embarrassing. I have no other word to describe it. I don't even want to call him Captain Flip-Flop anymore. I think he's just a full fat flop. Something that gets blown around by anything almost. They come up with these half-baked ideas that the moment someone starts to scrutinise, they throw away within 48 hours or within a few months. And really, is this the way to give the impression to the rest of the country that this is how they're going to manage an economy and manage the rest of the country? I think not.
But Marco, of course, Sir Keir Starmer is blaming you. He's blaming the Conservative Party for being fiscally irresponsible. The biscuit tin is empty. The dream of a green future has been cruelly snatched away by you guys.
Well, I didn't see him voting against the £420 billion we put in to help businesses and during COVID keep furlough going. And I know I might have different ideas about lockdown and all that kind of thing. I'm one of those that did vote, but now regrets it, and I don't mind admitting it. But I have to say, you know, he didn't vote against any of that. We've got that legacy to deal with, and we're dealing with it. And it's no coincidence that the United Kingdom now, thanks to Brexit, which he absolutely voted against at every opportunity, is now leading the rest of the EU economically. We are performing on virtually every possible economic measure better than them and many other countries. We're doing, you know, we've got the highest employment, the lowest level of unemployment, the highest level of growth, and we are going to be doing increasingly well. Look, Rishi promised he would halve inflation. He's more than halved it. He's going to be reducing debt, and he's going to be increasing growth. So things are moving in the right direction, Martin, and some of these big problems take time to sort out. But what time does to Keir Starmer is show him to be a full-fat flop.
OK, well, Marco, Michael Gove has called Sir Keir Starmer a jellyfish, spineless and invertebrate. Strong stuff. But isn't the point is that the Conservative Party seem to agree with a lot of the net zero targets? Boris Johnson brought in some of the toughest and most punitive net zero targets in all of the Western world. And there's still a division within the Conservative Party today arguing about boilers and the scrappage scheme and the cost of heat pumps. Is this not an opportunity, Marco, for the Conservatives to grow a backbone and actually say it'd be more popular if we ditched some of this net zero stuff?
I completely agree with that, Martin. You probably know that would have been my position. Now, you and I know each other. And, you know, on the doorstep, when I ask people what are their top 3 priorities, and I've knocked on thousands of doors, not a single one has ever mentioned net zero to me. They are worried about how they pay their bills. They are worried by the fact that their energy bills are very high. And that's been a difficulty. And the government has tried to help with that. But it's tried to help. But actually, our bills are higher because of this net zero approach. So, look, I'm sure you and I would both want to leave this planet in a better place for our children and our grandchildren. But it needs to be done in a practical way, in a fair way. And I think that, unfortunately, even Boris was taken over by this idealistic dogma, this new wave that happened over net zero and this arbitrary date of 2050. I mean, it's just implausible that, you know, the UK contributes a fraction of a % of carbon emissions, and China about 28%, the US a similar amount, Canada and many others. Whatever we do, if we sunk into the sea today, it would make absolutely no difference to the carbon emissions in this country. Yes, let's do the right thing, but I don't think working class people should be made to pay for it.
A lot of people will be watching this, Marco, and saying, hurrah, common sense speaks at last. Now, I'm still in the studio with Chris Hope, our political editor. He'd like to throw a question to you, if he could. Chris, fire away.
Well, Marco, you say all that, but you are in government, your party, and it was Theresa May's government that brought in the net zero target by 2050. So isn't all this problem caused by you?
Not by me personally, and there will be many MPs who disagreed with that. But as you know, when you are a team, you have to play as a team. Otherwise, you will be going against your coach every 5 minutes sometimes. Now, I don't recall there ever being a vote in Parliament for net zero being delivered by 2050. Do you?
Well, there was no vote, as you remember. It went through on the nod with a statutory instrument. There's never been a single vote. There's no mandate from Parliament for this. The net zero target amended a law from Labour in 2008.
Let's have
and
a
that's
vote.
Part of the problem, I think. There's no vote ever by any MP on net zero. And I think the problem you've got is a lack of a mandate for this target that your government imposed on the rest of the country.
And I completely agree with you.
Well, what can we say? Marco, I'm going to have a quick pop at you while you're still there, Marco. So if we haven't had a chance to vote on this, should we get a chance to vote on this, would you welcome some kind of national referendum on net zero, as we saw with Brexit?
Yes, I think that ultimately the power of any country relies in the will of its people. And the moment we start behaving more as, well, I wouldn't like to say a dictatorship, but as countries who ignore their voters, look what's happening in the EU now. Look how Paris is being besieged. We don't actually see much of that on television, but that is happening because ordinary people in Germany, in the Netherlands, in France are saying enough is enough. And, you know, it's wake up and smell the coffee time. And I've been one of those. I'm very proud, not just to call myself an MP, I call myself an elected representative. And that last word is very often forgotten. And that's why I'm so proud to represent my black country folk here in Dudley.
Excellent. Well, Marco, as you're on such fine form, Chris wants to have another swing. Chris.
Not a swing. Just want to pin you down, Marco Longhi. Just want to pin you down, not a swing. Just a quick one. Yes or no, should there be a referendum on that net zero commitment?
Yes, I personally would say yes to that. I mean, of course, we can't have a referendum every 5 minutes. We know that referenda aren't the best vehicle sometimes to deliver policy by government. And then the other argument would be, Chris, that people elect their representatives, their MPs, to vote on things on their behalf. I think this is a massive issue for the country, and I think it could well be one of those things. So I would personally say yes. But if we're going to leave it to MPs, then let's thrash it out in the chamber and let's see what comes out of that, at least, and have the mandate that way. But yes to a referendum.
Absolutely superb. Marco Longhi, Conservative MP for Dudley North. You've had your Weetabix. You're on fine form. Excellent. A lot of people will be watching this, Marco, and throwing their Weetabix in the air. Fantastic. Thank you. A referendum on net zero. You heard it there first on GB News. I think a lot of people out there would welcome that. Let the people have a say. Put it to the people. Are you sick of paying all this net zero stuff? But will they let us have a referendum? Because don't forget, they normally don't get the result they want. But anyway, moving on, superb start to the hour. You get lots more on this huge story on our website. And thanks to you, gbnews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got breaking news and all the brilliant analysis you've come to expect from GB News, so get clicking. Now, what would you do with an extra £1,500 every month for a whole year? Well, you could win that in our great British giveaway. It's 18 grand in cold, hard cash is up for grabs, and here's how you could make that money yours.
This is your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash. That's like having an extra £1,500 each month for the next year. And if you're thinking, I'd never win something like that, listen to the moment we told Phil from West Yorkshire he'd won our last Great British Giveaway.
Phil, I've got some really good news for you. You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
You're joking. That's brilliant news.
For your chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Now, what a cracking start to the show. Well, there's lots more to come yet because the European Union says Rishi Sunak's crackdown on strikes could breach the Brexit trade deal. We just can't get away from Brussels, can we? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking. Evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. there's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that. And police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment and the bureaucracy and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under. And of course the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and it's clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Rishi Sunak here. Join me for a special GB News People's Forum Live on Monday the 12th of February. I want to hear about the issues that matter to you. For your chance to be part of the audience and to put your questions to me, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com. See you there.
Welcome back. 5:25. Superb enjoyment this afternoon on the show. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, the European Union has claimed that Rishi Sunak's clampdown on strikes may have breached the Brexit trade deal. Well, the EU is reportedly considering triggering a dispute with the UK government over the introduction of so-called minimum service levels, and that's because the UK is seen to be watering down workers' rights in a way which is banned by the Brexit trade deal. Well, I'm joined now by David Payton, Professor of Industrial Economics at Nottingham University. David, thanks for joining us on the show. The big and the first question many people will be asking themselves here is like, hang on, I thought we left the European Union. How on earth has Brussels got any control whatsoever about strike rules in Britain?
Well, there's two issues here which is worth separating. One is whether we think the strike rules are a good idea in terms of minimum service. But the second is, as you say, who decides? Is it our MPs or is it Brussels? Now, the issue here is that the trade agreement we have the EU rests on there not being a reduction in workers' rights that doesn't affect trade. So that's the key issue here. But what's really interesting, and I think journalists haven't really picked up, most countries in the EU have some sort of minimum service requirements. Even in the areas of transport. They do vary quite a lot across the different countries, but for example, France has a law that says strikes have to have a minimum level of transport provision. So does Romania, Lithuania, Belgium. France actually have a range of services. So, if school teachers strike, you have to have sufficient provision that primary school pupils can still go to school. So the idea that the British law, whether or not you think it's a good idea, is way out of line with the EU is just not the case. So I suspect this is really not going to go anywhere. It's really just bluster from certain people in the EU who don't like the idea of the UK being able to decide things on their own and think they still have some control over us. I suspect the issue won't go anywhere.
David, you're exactly right. Guy Verhofstadt once again has been puffing up his chest and polishing his specs and threatening to get tough with the UK. But you are exactly right to point out that these minimum service requirements are in place already in a multitude of the 27 EU member states, which further asks the question, David, if that's the case, and if we're going not further or above and beyond what's already out in the EU, why on earth is Brussels poking its nose in?
Well, that's a good question, and you know, I don't think anything official has come from the EU. I suspect it's certain people in the EU trying to make a lot of noise, and this sort of tussle that goes on with unspoken threats and veiled threats, suggesting, well, if the UK decides to make its own decisions and changes its laws, the EU will try to make out that we're not able to do that. In the end, I think some people within the EU, as in Britain, are just resentful that we had the referendum and voted to leave the EU, and sort of have these sort of vague hopes that somehow in the future they can draw us back into their orbit. And the obvious thing for the UK, whether or not you think Brexit was a good or a bad idea, the idea that we should leave the EU, have no say over the rules, but just decide to go along with whatever they say, is probably the worst of all worlds. And I don't think that anyone on leave or remain side should be going along with that sort of approach. OK,
David Payton, thanks, George. I have to interrupt there because now we have to cross live to the United States. Donald Trump is issuing a statement on that Supreme Court ruling.
As you know, Iraq should have never happened. That was a balance against Iran, and we blew out the balance, and now Iran has essentially Iraq. And Iraq doesn't like saying that, but that's the way it is, and it's a shame. The world is in tremendous danger. We're in danger of possibly a World War III. And we have a man who's absolutely the worst president in the history of our country. Can't put two sentences together. He's not going to be able to negotiate with Putin or Xi or Kim Jong-un, North Korea. Not going to be able to negotiate with anybody. All he knows how to do is drop bombs all over the place, meaningless bombs, except they kill a lot of people. It costs a lot of money. Every time you see a bomb, it's another $1 million. And it actually sets us back. We have peace through strength. This should not be happening. The Middle East is blowing up. It's blowing up. And a lot of people are being killed, and it's so unnecessary. So I just say that in watching the Supreme Court today, I thought it's a very beautiful process. I hope that democracy in this country will continue. Because right now we have a very, very tough situation with all of the radical left ideas, with the weaponization of politics. They weaponize it like it's never been weaponized before. It's totally illegal, but they do it anyway. And it has to stop. Every one of the court cases that I'm involved, every single one, civil, whether it's the attorney generals or the district attorneys. You look at Fani in Georgia. They had many meetings with the White House and with the DOJ. They went there, 8-hour meetings. That was all staged. That was a phony hoax. And now you look at it, and it is a phony hoax. And hopefully that case will be dismissed in short order. It's a disgrace to this country. But they work together with the Justice Department and the White House, and not supposed to do that. Every one of these cases you see comes out of the White House. It comes out of Biden. It's election interference, and it's really very sad. I thought the presentation today was a very good one. I think it was well received. I hope it was well received. You have millions of people that are out there wanting to vote, and they happen to want to vote for me or the Republican Party, or whatever you want to, however you want to phrase it. But I'm the one running, and we are leading in every poll. We're leading in the local polls, in the state polls, and we're leading in the swing state polls, and we're leading very big in the national polls. So it's been a very great honor. We love the country. I think the reason we have such big leads, frankly, is that they loved 4 years of us compared to the 3 years plus the 3 years that they've gone with Biden, where you have open borders, you have crime. Nobody's ever seen crime like this, what's happening. And now the crime is being committed, much of it by the migrants that have come in illegally to our country. I was wondering about that. I said, a lot of these people come out of jails, they come out of mental institutions, they come out of places that you don't want to know about. We don't even know where they come from. We don't know who they are, where they are, They're being dumped in from mental institutions, from prisons and jails, and many terrorists are coming into our country. We're going to be paying a big price. They have to stop it. They have to close the border. By the way, the president can do it just by saying, I want the border closed. I closed the border. We had the safest border in the history of our country. Now we have the most unsafe border in the history of the world. There's never been a country with a border like this, not even a third world country. So we are, again, we're going out to Nevada right now. We'll be out there. Some of you are going to be out there with us. Otherwise, your colleagues will be. And hopefully we're going to have a big night, caucus tonight. We're going to have a very big night. We expect to have a very big night. The Virgin Islands, as you know, are also very much in play today, so we'll be hearing about them sometime during the day or later on in the evening. And it's an honor to have you at Mar-a-Lago. I hope you like it. It's worth a little more than $18 million. There's another case. It says it's worth $18 million. I said, which cabin are we talking about? But that's the kind of justice we have. When they say that to try and build up a case, that was a shame. But that gave up so much. When they said that, that gave up so much that Mar-a-Lago's worth $18 million. They had it appraised for, as you know, 50 to 100 times that amount. But we have a judge that's what he said. And he's supposed to be ruling on me. But who knows? Maybe he'll be fair. I doubt it, but maybe he'll be fair. So I want to thank everybody. And by the way, we proved that case 100%, 5 times over. That case is 100% proven, 5 times over. We've never seen anything like it. He just wouldn't dismiss it, no matter what. Shouldn't it be there? It should have been in the commercial division. Anyway, it's an honor to have you. I look forward to having you again, and I'll probably see you out in Nevada. Thank you very much.
The U.S. Supreme Court is said to be broadly skeptical in early reporting about the effort to try and kick you off the ballot. Having said that, though, speak to the argument, legal and otherwise, that your detractors have made leading up to the day. And it's an argument that was given voice by Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, not long.
All right, I got the gist.
There's no question.
Yeah, I got the gist.
President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
He doesn't say that anymore. So let me just tell you that I heard and I watched. And the one thing I'll say is they kept saying about what I said right after the insurrection. Because I think it was an insurrection caused by Nancy Pelosi. This was an insurrection, if it was an insurrection, which there were no guns, there were no anything except for the fact that they shot Ashley Babbitt. Somebody from the police force shot Ashley Babbitt. So unnecessary, so sad, so horrible. But there were no guns, there were no anything. But if you take a look at my words, right after, you take a look at my speech from the Rose Garden, which was very shortly after, or you take a look at I'm only on Truth now, but at that time we were tweeting and I was on Twitter. If you take a look at those 5 or 6 tweets, you will see very beautiful, very heartwarming statements. Go home, the police are doing their job, etc., etc. Beautiful statements. If you see my statement made in the Rose Garden, I think you have to watch that, because today they said the words of Trump. Now, if you take a look at the words of Democrats over the last period of time, look at Schumer's statement about the Supreme Court on the steps of the Supreme Court. He sounded like a mob boss. Take a look at any of them. Take a look at any. We put together a tape of vicious, violent statements made by Democrats. Nobody brings that up. Take a look at Maxine Waters and the vicious statements that she made. I didn't do that. I said peacefully and patriotically. The speech was called Peacefully and Patriotically. It's peacefully and patriotically. He said I said bad statement. It was the exact opposite. So I think you should take a look at the statements that I made before and after, and you'll see a whole different...
And that's Donald Trump there at Palm Beach, Florida, commenting on the decision of the US Supreme Court ahead of that, considering if Trump can stand in the 2024 presidential election in November, of course. He said of Joe Biden, we have the worst president in history. He can't even put 2 sentences together. All he does is meaninglessly drop bombs, $1 million each for these bombs. He warned the Middle East is blowing up. It's so unnecessary. And then he says here very quickly, we have the most unsafe border in the history of the world. Fighting talk, as you'd expect, from Donald Trump there in Florida. Now, Keir Starmer isn't the only leader who's getting criticised for his climate policies. Some Tory MPs aren't happy with Rishi Sunak's green credentials either. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Peter Andre. Join myself and Ellie Costello this Saturday morning on Saturday Morning Live, where we have a very special guest. Yeah, she just happens to be my wife.
I am so excited to join you guys, and yes, I'll be talking all about my new book, Teaching Kids How to Maintain Good Mental Health as They Grow Up.
Dr. Emily, she's an NHS doctor and an author, and she's written this amazing book, Healthy Mind, Happy You. So, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. till 12 p.m. See you then. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. 5:42. You're watching and listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, yet again, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak faces revolt within the Tory party. Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho is under fire from Climate Minister Graham Stewart and senior officials for proposing scrapping so-called boiler taxes meant to promote the use of expensive heat pumps. Well, joining now to go over this is former Conservative MP Neil Hamilton. Neil, welcome to the show. Fantastic to have you as ever. So here we go again. The Tories are in turmoil, not about Brexit, but this time net zero targets and the boiler tax, which was going to lump on £120 for every gas boiler in Britain. That's being ditched. The public seem to like it. The Tories, however, they're falling out about it.
Well, Rishi Sunak has woken up at last to the reality of this net zero nonsense, the vast costs which are going to be piled onto ordinary people in the middle of a cost of living crisis. You know, the cost of decommissioning gas in this country for power, for heating purposes, by 2050 is going to be £74 billion. That's the cost that will be incurred, in addition to the cost of installation of heat pumps, which would be 10,000 on average for ground source heat pumps, and up to 20,000 for each air source heat pump. You know, these are figures which are beyond the capacity of ordinary people to pay. These net zero fanatics who are opposing Sunak's proposal to get rid of this boiler tax aren't interested in ordinary people, of course, because they're not forced themselves to live on ordinary people's wages. And they believe in survival of the richest. That's what this policy is ultimately going to achieve, because we're massively increasing the cost of electricity generation and therefore heating and lighting costs, which are going to bear most heavily upon the poorer people in this country. And all for what? You know, Britain produces 1% of the world's CO2 emissions, and even if we suddenly found that Great Britain were to disappear from the map, it would make zero difference to the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, because China, which is currently building 250 coal-fired power stations, not just in China, but also in other countries around the world, would make up the difference in a few months.
Now, what's been fascinating about this case, Neil, is that the boiler industry got on a front foot, and they were very, very open about the fact, because, of course, the government was saying you have to make 4% of your sales non-gas boilers, heat pumps and the like, by April, or we'll fine you, we'll slap you with a fine of £3,000 for every unit you sold. And they said, OK, well, we're going to pass that cost on to the consumer. And they said very openly, if you're going to fine us, we're going to pass it on to the punter, at which point the punter started getting very angry at the politicians, and the policy has been dropped. It's a fantastic way of the industry to fight back.
Of course, well, it's obvious, isn't it? That's what you've got to do. But because nobody's buying heat pumps to start with, as we know, nothing like the numbers which are required to meet the government's net zero commitment by 2050. And anyway, most of the houses and flats in this country are completely unsuitable for heat pumps because they're not properly insulated, and therefore heat pumps are massively inefficient in those circumstances. And of course, as power costs increase, because the government is deliberately making the national grid less efficient, not more efficient, then the efficiency of heat pumps goes in the opposite direction. They work best and most commercially successfully in countries like Norway, which have cheap and abundant hydropower, and in countries like ours, where it's expensive to produce heat and light power, the heat pumps are very inefficient and very costly in comparison.
OK, former Conservative MP Neil Hamilton, we're going to have to leave it there. I just think the market should sort this out. I mean, if heat pumps were effective and affordable and did their job, people would buy them. If electric cars were affordable and reliable and did their job, people would buy them. Let the market decide. And how about a bit more carrot and a bit less stick? If people don't buy something, don't threaten them, don't fine them, make it better. OK, moving on, an illegal Channel migrant living under a rowing boat, can you believe this, says the police won't let him leave Britain. You couldn't make it up. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has made her much-anticipated appearance before the Scottish COVID inquiry today. It comes after allegations emerged that she deleted key pandemic WhatsApp messages, used the pandemic to push her own political agenda. But let's just cast our mind back, shall we, to August 2021, when Sturgeon was asked if she'd hand over all her WhatsApps to the inquiry. Here we go.
I think if you understand statutory public inquiries, you would know that even if I wasn't prepared to give that assurance, which for the avoidance of doubt I am, then I wouldn't have the ability. This will be a judge-led statutory public inquiry.
Which, for the avoidance of doubt, I am. OK. Well, you weren't, were you? But fast forward to today, and she was much less forthcoming.
WhatsApp messages between yourself and Mr Yusuf and Ms Lloyd were produced by you. Where did you get them?
They were provided to me through the Scottish Government.
But did you delete them?
Yes.
Did you consider yourself, against that background and your considerable ministerial experience, to be precisely the right First Minister for the job?
No, that's not how I would have thought of it at all. There's a large part of me wishes that I hadn't been.
All right, then. I'm joined now by Tory MP Lee Anderson. Lee, are those just crocodile tears?
Well, it looks like crocodile tears to me, Patrick. I mean, first we had the missing camper van. Nobody knows where that is. Now we've got this nonsense. We've got these burner phones, dodgy £5 phones from wherever they bought them from, WhatsApp messages going missing. It all looks a little bit dodgy to me. I mean, she's bleating on there, she's crying on screen. This is not cutting no ice. You know, it's crocodile tears. It makes you wonder what the SNPs are all about, Patrick. It looks... I mean, the people that have burner phones, let's be clear, people that have these dodgy phones where you can't trace them and disappearing WhatsApp messages, these are normally criminals, these are drug dealers. And you know what? These SNPs are no better than criminals.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Earlier on Breakfast.
Maybe a reconciliation between the brothers, seeing as he was by himself in times of need? No, nothing, which is really, really sad.
We don't support war memorials being disrespected, and we don't support people covering their face to get away with committing criminal activity, and that's why we're announcing these changes today.
The one thing Elliot is right about is that there are rich people who are abusing loopholes to get away with this. That's what should be banned, not the tax itself.
Actually, the much better solution is simply to scrap inheritance tax.
A load of young women into Wembley Stadium, and I will stand there with a microphone going, "You are strong, independent women."
Now do your maths properly.
Get on with it.
From 6, it's Breakfast on GB News.
Now, next Monday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will appear in a special show on GB News. He'll be answering questions from you, the great British public, the only people who really matter. And you can be in the audience. Simply scan the QR code you can see on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/PM. GB News People's Forum, the Prime Minister, will be live at 8 p.m. next Monday, exclusively on GB News, so get stuck in. Now, earlier on in the show, we had a press conference from Donald Trump. He was live in Florida speaking on the ruling to try and prevent him from standing in the presidential election in November. He was coming out with some astonishing stuff. I think it's worth going over. Of Joe Biden. He said Joe Biden is the worst president in American history. He can't even put 2 sentences together. All he does is meaninglessly drop bombs that cost $1 million each. He then went on to say we are heading towards World War III. The Middle East is blowing up, and it's all so unnecessary. He then rallied about democracy, and he's talking about the radical left weaponising that. He said this: "I hope democracy in this country will continue. The radical left have weaponised politics, and they're tearing this country apart." He then went on to talk about the border. And he said this: we are leading in every poll. Joe Biden is afraid of me. And on borders specifically, he ramped up the rhetoric, because don't forget, as we speak right now, there's a standoff, a Mexican standoff literally between Texas and it's Greg Abbott there, the governor of Texas, who's in a standoff with President Biden. National Guard has been sent in from Florida. Ron DeSantis is sending his National Guard to help in Texas. Things are getting so bad. 25 states, Republican states in America, have pledged allegiance with Texas to send their National Guard, if necessary, to try and stop the chaos in the border. We had Greg Swenson, the chair of Republicans Overseas, on the show early this week, saying as many, he reckons, could be as high as 20 million have come over the border. The official figure is between 8 to 10 million. The truth is, they don't know how many people have come over the porous border, the unstoppably porous border on America's border with Mexico. Trump said this, severely ramping up the rhetoric now ahead of that election, which promises to be the most explosive and controversial presidential election in American political history, perhaps even global political history. He said this: we have open borders. Much of the crime in America is committed by migrants. They're being released from jails, from mental institutions. He then said, we have many, many terrorists pouring into the United States. We have to close that border, he said. We must close the border. America depended upon it. And he said this, he rounded off by saying, America has the most unsafe border in the history of the world. If you thought Donald Trump was going to be gagged, if you thought Trump was going to be silenced, you're wrong. He came out blazing today in Florida. He's seemingly unstoppable in the Republican primary, and the smart money might be him as the next US president. Anyway, I'm signing off now. I've been Martin Daubney. I'll be back tomorrow 3 till 6. Right after this, Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. Have a great evening.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Further snow to come during the rest of today in the north, but rain generally elsewhere, and it is turning milder from the south. What we've seen during the day is mild Atlantic weather trying to push in from the south, cold air sitting to the north, and in between the band of rain mixing and turning to sleet and snow in places. But through the evening, overnight, the snow will increasingly become confined to higher parts of northern England, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further disruption possible, but at lower levels mostly it's rain and a very mild end to the night across southern parts with some heavy showers moving through. Cold in the far north of Scotland with further snow showers, another centimetre or two. But really we're following on Friday morning this band of rain, sleet and hill snow as it pushes north into much of Scotland, the far north of England and Northern Ireland. The snow becoming confined to the very tops of the hills for Northern Ireland and Northern England before eventually rain takes over. But further disruptive snow is likely across eastern Scotland, increasingly so later Friday, whilst it's rain further south. Further showers coming into much of central and southern England as well as Wales, and that's how we're looking on Saturday morning. Very mild across England and Wales, some sunny spells but also a few showers. Further disruptive snow for eastern Scotland before eventually the cold weather becomes confined to the far north of Scotland, much milder this weekend elsewhere.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basic-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes, something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop? If the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones, I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be